Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our session. My name is Eric Carter. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at Sysdig. And today we're going to talk about how to build your secure DevOps platform with Sysdig and SUSE Rancher. We are a partner with SUSE and have a lot of capabilities that we can bring to the Rancher environment. So we want to talk through some of that and some of the best practices that you can think about, regardless of the tooling, to make sure that you're set up for success. Let's get started. I just want to kick off with a bit of table setting in the sense that wanting to look at why are we moving in the direction of things like Kubernetes, microservices, containers, cloud. And ultimately, most of you are saying it's really about doing things faster, improving our release velocity, developers being more productive, and really innovation, right? To be able to innovate quickly in ways that we weren't able to do before. There's also the benefit of being able to scale up and down with demand, which also helps in some sense with cost and things like that as we move to the cloud. Now, one of the things to think about, though, when we go in this direction is that security that we always cared about follows us into the cloud, in the sense that a lot of the same things like software vulnerabilities, things that we need to take care of before we run in production, things like configurations and permissions of our environment. Those things need to be in proper order. We need to be watching during runtime or during real-time production to know when something bad is happening and be able to respond. And of course, most of us as businesses need to also meet compliance mandates, right? PCI, SOC 2, Type 2, all those kind of things. Now, what becomes a bigger challenge as we move into the cloud is that a lot of things work differently. Here's just some stats, right? One, as we talked about, release velocity, right? 59% of companies are deploying at least once every few days. We have one customer that deploys many, many, many times a day. And so this comes from a GitLab study. And essentially, think about that. Like, with so many things changing, are we able to keep up, right? And if a lot of what we're working with now are not even people-ish things, it's more like cloud or non-human machines. Here, 88% of cloud identities are non-human. There can be things happening with a speed and a level that we might not be aware of. And so those are issues. And then last but not least, when we're thinking about containers, our recent study showed that 44% of containers live less than 5 minutes. If you don't have a real-time view into that 5 minutes or less, do you know whether there was some level of compromise or not? What do we find? We find that traditional tools built for standard environments, bare metal VMs, those kind of things, they did a great job, but they're not doing as well in a cloud native environment for various reasons. Now let's do something and talk just real quickly about why Sysdig and SUSE, right? We've come together to help you with the dynamics of that. And we'll look in the next slide at some of the key things to look for or issues that you'll face when you move to containers and Kubernetes. But our partnership is built essentially around providing the security and visibility for SUSE Rancher environments to help you together with that solution increase the automation, be faster at innovating, as I mentioned, and just making sure we're getting to the value that we want to get to much, much faster, right? And so our partnership is built to help joint customers drive that security, to confidently build the services and applications on Kubernetes, as we mentioned here. So what is it about Rancher that we believe is a benefit to you as users of, or as folks investigating Kubernetes? Well, just a quick message here. One is like Sysdig, SUSE and the Rancher team that builds these solutions are very much into the open approach, meaning a lot of things built and centered around community, around open source, and so on. And that openness extends to things like, hey, we've got a solution here that simplifies Kubernetes management, but simplifies it for any Kubernetes. It could be off-the-shelf open source. It could be in the cloud. And so you have a great deal of flexibility here to help you as you think about what and where you want to run different types of Kubernetes solutions. And not just, one and done. You probably will roll out many clusters. You've got prod, you've got dev, you've got different areas, right? Rancher is also very, very helpful when you move into a multi-cluster environment, similar to what you'll see about Sysdig in just a moment. All right, so you've decided to adopt containers, Kubernetes, and what are some of the things then that you will face? Let's take a look at those challenges and more with the security lens in mind. Again, starting at the left, a lot of times one of the benefits of open source and of containers is that we can get a container and leverage that as a part of our microservice-based application. The challenge is that oftentimes there are known vulnerabilities, there are code vulnerabilities, and if we just run that wholesale in our environment, we might expose ourselves to risk. And so that is something that you'll need to take care of, meaning scanning those images and scanning the code for things that are known. If there are fixes available, applying those fixes the best you can, and then being prepared to run in your environment, again, with a reduced amount of risk. So that's key. Also, as we're putting out these environments and we're running, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, there's a lot of configuration issues that can arise. And in fact, in recent days, the topic of configuration as a security threat, or rather, I should say misconfigurations, is arising because a lot of things now we do is around things like infrastructure as code and a lot of automation. And so here, the point is that whether it's based around user permissions or how things are interacting in the cluster, network security, and so on, those are things that can cause risk in this dynamic type of environment. Now, containers themselves present a challenge, which many of you, I'm sure, are aware of, in the sense that they are, in essence, a bit of a black box meant to run that way so that everything is fully contained and I can run them in different clusters in different places. The challenge is, how do you see not just the container, but what's happening inside of that container? And again, not all solutions are created equal in the sense of giving you the right level of visibility, one, and two, helping you understand, the interaction of that container and the activity that might be happening therein, right? So that's something to look into in terms of how do I get the best level of visibility for that? And that visibility needs to include Kubernetes in cloud context. So think about a large dynamic environment and something happens. It's not enough to know this container it happened to. You really need to know where in my estate, what cloud, what region, what Kubernetes cluster, what even down to the pod level as an example, right? And so today's modern solutions will give you the visibility, but will also give you all of the metadata associated with the thing that's happening so that you have that at hand when you go to investigate or go to solve, right? The last thing I want to point out is the nature of containers. Earlier, I mentioned some container jobs are running 5 minutes or less. When containers die, they take with it really the payload or whatever it was up to and doing. And we're all aware of that. There are solutions to do persistent storage and so on. But again, during that time, if the container is no longer running, do you have at hand the kind of information, the kind of details that you need around things that were happening, users that were interacting, and so on, that will help you to perform things like forensics in the environment? So these are the things that you need to think about and you need to solve for when you're moving into the containers in Kubernetes world, whether it's with SUSE Rancher or any other type of management solution. So I wanted to encapsulate here a set of practices for you to think about. And in just a second, I'll show you how some of these things show up inside the tooling that Sysdig provides. Let's start at the left-hand side, thinking about code, right? Meaning, in this case, we're rolling out things with Helm charts or just simple YAML files or Terraform, right? And think about that. That's meant to make it easier to kind of cookie cutter or get these environments going. But if there's a configuration error or problem with that, you might be, repeating that over and over. And again, having, in essence, a risky configuration. So one of the current practices that's gaining momentum is infrastructure as code security. That means we're scanning those templates or those files and applying basically a view or visibility based on policies that you can create to say that, hey, make sure that these things are set properly, permissions and so on. And then, over time, if we're making changes to that, things we call drift, to have that auto remediated. So checking out those infrastructure as code files and making sure they're adhering to your policies is key. Image scanning, we talked about a moment ago. We want to be able to scan those images, and you can do that in the registries, and that works very, very well, and you'll want to do that. But a lot of folks now are backing that into their CI/CD tooling so that as these containers are being built in something like Jenkins, that you're getting a level of visibility. Hey, here are the things that are, high level severity or critical level severity and so on, so that the CVEs are visible, known fixes are there, available, you're pointed to how to get that quickly fixed, right? So to be able to do that, and then to also be able to block images from proceeding is also a key capability that you'll want to look for, because again, you don't want to have something that has a known exposure moving over into production and then causing your business issues. So let's say we've taken care of all of that pre-work. We've got ourselves set up for success. Now we have our environments. What are some of the practices we need to be thinking about? One is posture management. Here we've got two acronyms, Cloud Security Posture Management, Kubernetes Security Posture Management. In both of these cases, it's really about inspecting your environment, managing those cloud configurations. And that, again, could be based on users, processes, systems, and so on. And you can, even in this realm, inspect your environment in such a way to say, help me understand where, if I need to be PCI compliant, I am hitting the mark or I'm not, right? There are benchmarks from the CIS organization that you can apply. There are things, for instance, that we have done at Sysdig to map things like compliance standards, the book, chapter, verse, to setups in your environment or proper configurations in your environment so that you're set up for success and to be secure. Now, when you're running the containers, earlier, I mentioned that seeing inside a container can be tricky. It's one of the things that we help with through a project called Falco open source, and you'll see that on my next slide. But the idea here is that, like a security camera, you want to be able to see any of the activity that's happening so that you can know what is really unwanted or things that are suspicious or malicious in nature, right? And being able to have a level of control over setting up rules and policies for the things you want to monitor, the things where you want to monitor that. You may want to apply certain rules and policies to different environments depending on what the data that's being managed is and so on, right? And apply even a lens of compliance to those as well, so that you are understanding where things are being violated. And that could be an innocent violation by someone who's just unknowing, or it could be something worse, like our little hacker there in his hoodie in the picture showing you. So you'll want to watch the environment. These are things that image scanning, infrastructure as code scanning that just aren't going to help you with, because it's really real time, 0 day, any kind of those things like that you'll want to keep an eye out for, because there's really no other place to catch these. Now, having said all that, when the bad things happen, and they will, hopefully on the severity of bad, not so severe, but you'll want to be able to respond. And what does that mean? That means certainly you want to set up alerts so that you're knowing when to jump into action, but you'll also want to be able to capture data from the running workload or the running container, the host where it's happening, so that you have that as a tool to dive in, see what happened, prevent it from happening in the future. And of course, we want to remediate and make sure that we're closing the loop on all these things kind of in a GitOps workflow, as I mentioned here on the slide. So a lot of practices that you can put in place. There are different tools that do many of these things. Sysdig has brought a lot of these things together as an example. For those of you who aren't familiar with who Sysdig is, just a real quick one-on-one, we sort of began as an open source solution. Our founder, if you go back in time, was one of the co-creators of Wireshark. There are some aspects of that has kind of a feeling inside of Sysdig. We have two projects, Sysdig Open Source and Falco, as I mentioned earlier. This is really about capturing and giving you information and visibility across Linux, containers, Kubernetes, and now also cloud, so that, again, you're getting the kind of visibility you need in a cloud native world to detect threats, right? And so I think a lot of organizations are finding what we do very effective for adding that security built for cloud native, let's say. And our solutions that we provide to the market are Sysdig Secure. Think about that as more of the security lens. That's a lot of the things that I've been talking about so far. And then Sysdig Monitor, which is really more the health and performance side. And what's great about this is that you can get both essentially from the same tooling. And sometimes a security incident will start as a blip on your performance radar, like suddenly the resources are going off the charts. Hey, there's something happening that's security related, right? We're built on open source stack, so a number of projects that we leverage, that we contribute to, and of course the community is contributing to. So I think that helps with innovation and making sure that we are keeping up with the fast moving world of cloud native. So a lot of good things here that we're bringing in the world of not just containers and Kubernetes, but also cloud infrastructure, because now many of us are taking the applications that we're building and we're running them on something like AWS or Google Cloud or Azure. And with that, we also need to kind of keep an eye on that surrounding cloud estate, that cloud infrastructure, as well as the containers and Kubernetes that we are leveraging in those clouds. And again, checking for software vulnerabilities, configuration, runtime threats, compliance, all that. So that's where we bring something to bear, where we're helping you from the time you're designing and building and ready to push things out, and then when you're running them, right? So that's the message. And I want to just show you how this shows up for us at Sysdig to give you some insight into the capabilities that you might want to have for your own environment. So right now I'm switching over to my demo screen. You'll see here Sysdig Secure. Sysdig Monitor is the other piece. I won't spend any time there, but if you're looking to get more insight into what's happening with my containers and things like dashboards that give you the kind of performance metrics, golden signals, that kind of thing, we can help you with that. But where I've landed is in kind of this overview, what we call insights, which is bubbling up the things that are happening right now. Right, the view here is in my Kubernetes environment, but I can also see it based on more cloud view and even based on users. But here you see I've got several clusters under management, and I am having various events that are firing that we have set up in our demo environment, like somebody's running a shell in a container, or writing in below root and kind of doing some file activity that shouldn't be happening, or launching suspicious network tools. So the idea here is, hey, these are the things that if nothing else, you need to investigate and have a look at. And from here, you can go and investigate different things that are happening, like the terminal shell. What is it that's happening? What's the severity? Remember I mentioned context, right? So here we're giving you the cloud where it's happening, the Kubernetes information of where it's happening, the container information, right? Different tags that we have applied to say, hey, if we're supposed to be PCI compliant, and the fact that this is happening is putting us at risk, right? And we'll take another look at this in a second. But the idea here is that we can, show you what's happening around Kubernetes. We can also give you insight into things like your cloud activity. Depending on the cloud you're running, we're using different tools, and you can see what things are being ran or services being created. And sometimes these things will go hand in hand, in the sense that something's happening with my cloud, and then something starts happening in my container cluster. I want to know those things. So that's the idea is here, again, to help you in your running environment and to get started. As I mentioned, the idea of also being able to get started by scanning ahead of time, we can help you do that, not just in the pipeline and in the registry, but also down into your running environment. And I'll show you that real quick, so that across my clusters, I can get a view into the different vulnerabilities that are there, and click in to get a little more detail as an example, right? To see what's happening. Now, the other thing is that we have applied something that we call Risk Spotlight. Risk Spotlight is this. Basically, when that container is running, not only are we determining, yeah, there's all these vulnerabilities, and there happens to be a ton of them here in this one, right? 1,753. But when we apply, okay, they are there, but the ones that are actually invoked in the running environment, they actually being used in the container, those are the ones you need to focus on. And so Risk Spotlight helps to narrow down the number of vulnerabilities that you have to think about to begin with, right? And that is helpful in the sense that I can help my developers from having to think too much about this massive amount of vulnerabilities and just focus on the ones that are being used in production. Those are the ones that represent risk, right? And so being able to scan for vulnerabilities, also being able to run different checks and benchmarks against your environment. I have one here that, for instance, is tailored around Rancher. So we've ran this Rancher benchmark based on CIS benchmarks, right? And we can get a readout of how are we doing, right? So you'll see things like greens and reds kind of telling you where you stand with regard to the environment that you've set up. And here we're doing quite well because all 9 of these controls are passing, and this is looking at the worker nodes that are there in kubelet, right? And it gives you some insight into, hey, what is this check and so on. Now, when something is amiss, we will also give you information about, hey, what you need to do to turn this from a red to a green is take this set of actions, right? And this is all around setting you up for success for the places you're running your applications, whether that's Kubernetes based, also around the different clouds and so on, right? So let's say now we're set up again, as I mentioned, and let's look at some of the policies that are available for the runtime, right? So this starts to get into where I mentioned the Falco open source project. Sysdig has a set of rules that are included in Sysdig Secure that are essentially based on the Falco project. And here we've codified these, we've tagged them with different standards and tags based on things like your compliance standards or the cloud you're running in, and you'll see lots of different things. And these can basically be leveraged inside of policies that you can build that will look for things that are happening in your environment, right? And ultimately, these get surfaced as a policy for runtime, and we'll take a look at a couple of those here. So as an example, right, we can see, we're looking for disallowed container activity or log4j running in a Fargate environment, suspicious Kubernetes activity, and so on, right? Let's look at this one, terminal shell in a container, right? And if I show you the rule, so under the hood is essentially what Falco is, right? It's looking for a set of conditions, and you can say, hey, give me this output to tell me exactly where and what's happening, right? And then from there, decide what action to take. Well, Sysdig, in the policies that we create, have a few things that you can do. One is obviously you can take this and scope it to a specific Kubernetes cluster, my entire environment, to a specific container, and so on. And I can choose that if this thing is happening, if this runtime event or this activity or this malicious thing is happening, kill the container or stop the container, right? Make sure that that threat is managed in that way. And then we can also create this capture file. And earlier I mentioned that you want to have information around what happened, even if a container is not running anymore. So this is like a DVR recording, essentially the before, during, and after an event that gets created when the rule triggers. And that gives you something to actually be able to go back and take a look at. So let's say that I've set this rule up. I've decided, to get notified in whatever channel I've decided, it can be Slack, could be things like PagerDuty and so on. And now I'm looking maybe I'm in the security operations center and I want to take a look at what are my runtime events and things that are happening right now. And you see a bunch of things that we have had triggered in the environment. As an example, here in a cluster I've got running in AWS, the terminal shell in a container has happened. That means someone has opened terminal and is doing some things inside of this container. Typically considered a no-no, right? And so we're giving you the information about this and how what's going on, but you can also look deeper, right? So we're capturing an activity audit of this event, right? And by dropping in here, you can start to understand a little bit about what's happening in this event. What are the commands that are taking place? What's the network activity, Kubernetes activity, and so on, right? And here you can see, basically someone has gotten in and touched a bunch of files and ultimately are then ending with shredding their history, which looks pretty sketchy if you ask me, right? So again, giving you a way to have some insight and to investigate what's happening in your environment. And you can go even further with one of those capture files. And essentially, that gives you this really deep readout of all the system call activity that's happening in that, in and around that event that we have captured for you. And you can start digging through these things, right? And so that's essentially the insight we are providing for you, in the sense that we want to help you to get visibility into your environment, help you be set up for success even to begin with, and then to help you investigate when things are actually going wrong in the environment, together with a SUSE Rancher deployment, right? And so at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to help you shorten the time to value, to innovate faster, as I said at the beginning, increase the automation that you can have in and around your environment. SUSE and the Rancher solution do a great job of helping you do this in and around Kubernetes with any flavor. Sysdig helps you with this in and around security, visibility, and really setting you up for success so that your projects stay on time, doing the things that they need to do with a reduced amount of risk. And that's effectively our message to you. And hopefully some of the things that you learned today will help you to evaluate solutions for your own environment. If you're just getting started, we'd love to have a chat with you and we can help you see some of these things live. You can learn more at sysdig.com/partners/SUSE Rancher. A lot of good information there for you, and things that will help you dive deeper into some of the things that I talked about today. On any of our web pages, you can also start a free trial at any time. So we appreciate the chance to have this discussion today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and certainly explore a lot of the other information available to you. Thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.